After several straight years of mediocrity, it looked like 2014, for all intents and purposes, was going to be a lot of the same for the Dallas Cowboys. It just did. A defense that was really, really bad in 2013 didn't look like it was going to be a whole lot better. The team drafted an offensive lineman in the first round instead of Johnny Manziel. My God, all of this and all of that. Jason Garrett had lame duck status. There were all types of questions about Tony Romo. You name it. It was all abound for the Cowboys. Well, then a funny thing happened along the way. The Cowboys did the one thing that I said they needed to do in the run-up to the 2014 season. The one chance I said that they had, even though I wasn't sure they were going to commit to it because they had never really committed to it, was that they needed to totally change the way they conducted themselves first on offense, and ultimately that would trickle to all areas of the field, even the defensive side of the ball. That they needed to pound DeMarco Murray early. They needed to pound him often. They needed to control the clock, control time of possession, control field position, control how much, or in this case to their benefit, how little the defense was actually on the field, and take the ball some out of Tony Romo's hands so that way you were limiting his opportunities to make mistakes. Well, wouldn't you fucking know, the Dallas Cowboys actually figured it out in 2014. That's what they did. They pounded the rock. They became, imagine this, the Dallas Cowboys, a physical football team. Something really, honestly, they haven't been in over 20 years. They became a physical smash-mouth team, and as a result, they reap the benefits. They win their division, go 12-4, make it to the divisional round of the playoffs where they stick a game to the Packers, and damn near, you could argue, could have or should have beaten the Packers in Lambeau Field. And now we head into 2015, and there are a lot of lofty expectations for this Cowboys team. With what they did last year, a lot of people think they will do the same this year, and maybe with the experience they gained from last year, we could be looking at a Cowboys team that is Super Bowl bound. It's possible. It is possible. Now, this offseason, they didn't lose a lot, but what they did lose mattered. Most specifically, of course, is DeMarco Murray. Now, sure, part of this could be the arrogance of the system of believing you've invested 3 first-round picks in your offensive line. You had the best offensive line unit in the league in 2014. That you don't have to pay big-time money to a running back to be able to get great production out of that position. And there's something to be said about that. We've seen this for many years under Gary Kubiak systems, whether it be in Denver or even when he went into Baltimore last year with Justin Forsett. You had the zone blocking system. You could put in different guys whose skill sets fit that zone blocking system. In Denver, whether it was Terrell Davis or Mike Anderson or Rolandis Gary, Clinton Portis, it didn't really matter. Their backs always seemed to produce. And again, you even saw that last year in Baltimore when, of all people, Justin Forsett had himself a very nice season. So even though the Cowboys really don't run that type of system, there's a belief in the personnel and the protection and the blocking up front in the identity of the Cowboys organization that maybe a DeMarco Murray isn't that important. And they may end up being right. Or they could be totally ass wrong, and because of that mistake, because of that decision, end up right back in their usual cycle of mediocrity. Now, the big free agent signing that the Cowboys did make in the offseason was bringing in Greg Hardy. Granted, they signed him. It looked like initially he was going to have a 10-game suspension. That has since been reduced to 4. There's no doubt that Greg Hardy is a very talented football player. Would I personally want him on my team? I don't know. With that said, though, the Cowboys desperately needed an impact edge rusher. And there is no question that when on the field, Greg Hardy can be just that, an impact edge rusher. And it was one of those one-year type of prove-it deals. It made a lot of sense for the Dallas Cowboys. In a sense, it's the exact opposite of what the Dallas Cowboys have done for so many years. When it came to DeMarco Murray, the Cowboys of old would have re-signed him a year ago and made him the highest paid running back in the league. They would have sat there and went after a Greg Hardy in free agency and given him a 5-year deal with something like $35, $40 million guaranteed. And continue to perpetuate that cycle of their salary cap troubles that they've had for so many years. They didn't do that. They didn't have the ability to, because since they let DeMarco Murray leave and they had given some money to Greg Hardy, they still needed to figure out a way to get Dez Bryant's deal done. And ultimately they did, to the benefit, I think, frankly, of all parties involved. The Cowboys doing business just a little bit differently, not totally, but a little bit differently. Some tweaks in the game plan, and I think that's something that could bear some fruit for this organization. Now, in terms of the NFL draft, you know, you look at their first round pick, Byron Jones. There's no question. Morris Claiborne has been a bust. Now they've lost Orlando Scandrick, their best corner for the year, to a knee injury. They need Byron Jones, whether it be at corner or safety, to be an impact player right away. Somebody with size and athleticism and versatility in that defensive backfield is something the Cowboys sorely and desperately lacked and sorely and desperately needed. In the second round, they got themselves what they hoped to be a real steal in a situational pass rusher and nothing else if Randy Gregory. This is a guy who is talented, but this is a guy who, frankly, I thought was better in 2013 at Nebraska than 2014 in Nebraska. And for all the media buzz and all the talk and all the draft picks and everything else, I honestly think Randy Gregory went in the 2015 NFL draft about where he should have. But now he comes into a situation where all the pressure isn't on him. He can just sit in there and fit in, you know, find his place, and have a role. You have DeMarcus Lawrence on one side, so there'll probably be a little pressure on him. Obviously, once Greg Carty comes into the fold, there's going to be pressure on him to produce. And then you throw a Randy Gregory into the mix. You know, the Cowboys did a good job of adding some additional firepower to that defensive line, an area that could use some firepower, similar to how they beefed up their offensive line in recent years. And speaking of that offensive line, you would imagine at some point in time that undrafted Lyle Collins out of LSU is going to be a starter on the interior of that Cowboys offensive line at left guard. Is that going to come right away? Could that come at some point in time during the season? Who knows? But you look at the Cowboys. This is, again, another situation where, in this case, actually, the Cowboys did what the Cowboys would do. They said, we don't care about the concerns and all this and all that. This guy was a first-round talent. We don't give a shit. We're going to take the gamble, and we're going to sign him. And now you basically got a first-round pick for undrafted free agent money, or damn near close to it. So in some ways, it's like the Cowboys, they would do it, but in some ways, it's entirely opposed to what everything Jerry Jones has stood for so many years. And again, to the benefit of the Cowboys organization. Now, looking at this team heading into 2015, I look at their biggest strengths. You've got to start with that offensive line. You have to. Because that right there affected so many things positively for this organization in 2014 and just really helped set the tone for that season and gave this team an identity that, frankly, they needed. They've had an identity for years. They were Tony Romo's team. They were a pass-first offense with a doo-doo defense. Well, that wasn't exactly getting it done. That was 8-8, missing the playoffs every year. The identity of that team became the physical maulers and the offensive linemen they have up front. And they built off of that, and everything else worked off of that. And I expect it to be more of the same in 2015 in this unit. God forbid, could I say, it could be even better. Because you've got a bunch of young guys that haven't even reached the peak of their careers here in Smith and Frederick and Martin, and then you throw into the mix at some point in time a Lyle Collins. You know, you look at the 1 weak link, might be right tackle Doug Free, but he's still an adequate right tackle, and that's perhaps going to be your weak link. The Cowboys are in a really good spot with their offensive line. And now look at the receiving core, too. You got Dez Bryant, he's a stud. Terrence Williams in year number 3 could have a semi-breakout type of season. You have Cole Beasley out of the slot, a nice weapon again. Maybe Devin Street gives him a little bit more, gets a little more opportunity in year number 2. Jason Witten is Jason Witten. You know, this is a team that should be able to move the ball when they need to through the air, in part as well, not just because of the talent overall in their receiving core, but because they have Tony Romo. Tony Romo is a strength for this team. He is a franchise quarterback. He'll never be an elite quarterback, and people need to stop talking about him like he's an elite quarterback. And we need to stop making defenses and excuses for Romo and some of the dumb shit and bad plays he's made over the years, especially in key critical situations. But as you saw in 2014, that a Tony Romo with less responsibility, a Tony Romo with less pressure on him, is actually much better for it. He manages the game better. He could still give you some big plays that you need, but you could reduce the opportunities to make debilitating, crippling mistakes. So as long as they continue to do that, Tony Romo is a strength, and actually a pretty big strength for this Cowboys team. There are a lot of teams, believe me, my Chicago Bears included, that wish they had somebody the caliber of Tony Romo. So while this sounds like a nonstop Cowboys love fest, which you would be surprised hearing from me, I suppose, there are some concerns. I look at their secondary on the defensive end. You know, they lost Scandrick for the year. They're not good at corner to begin with, and they lose their best guy. I have concerns about them both at corner and safety, and that could be a real Achilles heel for this team, especially later on in the year if they're in the playoff chase, they're in the playoffs themselves, and they face a team like, let's say, Green Bay, somebody of that like, that could spread them out. That could be a spell real doom for the Dallas Cowboys, especially if that pass rush doesn't step up. I have some concerns about their pass rush, too. Yes, they drafted Randy Gregory. Yes, they signed Greg Hardy. But I'm not sure where that pass rush in the interior of the line is going to come from. And who's to say that they're going to get a lot of great pass rush from the edge outside of Hardy? DeMarcus Lawrence had an occasional flash, but he didn't show anything that leads you to believe there's brilliance coming. And Randy Gregory, who knows if he can even stick as a situational defensive end in a 4-3 at the NFL level. And then I also got to look at their running game. This is one of these things we're going to find out this year. Is it about the people up front? Is it about the scheme? Is it about the identity? Or does that running back behind them matter too? And we'll find out if a combination of Joseph Randle and DeMarco Murray and Christian Michael are the answer, one of the three, all of the three. Are they going to be the answer? Are they not going to be the answer? Only time will tell. But if you're the Cowboys and you're Cowboy fans in particular, this has to be the single biggest concern. Some of the things I talk about on defense are valid and legitimate. But this is the biggest key. This is the biggest concern. Because of so many of the good things that the Cowboys did in 2014, it was based off of that running game. If that running game struggles or scuffles or isn't the same or close to the same in terms of effectiveness, I should say, in 2015, then that will get the defense on the field more because the Cowboys will have the ball less. Tony Romo will throw the ball more, and we could be heading back to 8-8. Again, only time will tell, but that has to be the single biggest concern because so many of the good things they did in 2014 started there. In 2015, if they want to get even farther in the season and in the playoffs, it needs to start there as well. In terms of players to watch for this team this year, I look at the defensive end, Greg Hardy. You brought him in on a one-year prove-it deal. This is a guy that can be an impact edge rusher, and the Cowboys really need him to be. Their first-round pick, Byron Jones, the corner safety combo from UConn. You're talking about a guy who set a world record in the broad jump, an athlete for days, a guy who can play. He's more than just an athlete, but they need him to start somewhere right away and be at least solid because that secondary, again, is not particularly good. On the offensive end, I look at Terrence Williams, the third-year wide receiver out of Baylor. With Dez Bryant there and Jason Witten there, in the passing game, maybe he'll never be more than the number 3 option. But, man, if he could step up and take his game to a little bit of a higher level and maybe become that number 2 option outside, take some of that pressure off of Jason Witten, this Cowboys offense becomes even more difficult to defend. And if they have some struggles in the running game, they're going to need somebody like Terrence Williams to step up. And then I look at the running back situation. I'll go with Christian Michael. Here's a former second-round pick for the Seattle Seahawks. The Cowboys brought him into the fold. From an athletic talent standpoint, he's the most talented of the 3 between Joseph Randle, Darren McFadden, and himself. Here's the guy that at some point in time, the Cowboys probably have patterns and visions on him actually being the starter throughout the rest of the season. If he can come in and take over that starting job, if he can come in and show that he can be a 3-down back at the NFL level and he can be effective behind that offensive line, this could be a really good Cowboys team again in 2015. In terms of their schedule, I start off right away, weeks 1 and 2. 2 divisional games against 2 teams that are going to be coming after them hard in 2015. They host the Giants on Sunday night in week 1, and then they go to Philadelphia to take on Chip Kelly's Philadelphia Eagles. If the Cowboys want to leave, no doubt. If the Cowboys want it to be known that this is their bitch, the NFC East, and that you have to come through them, they need to win those 2 games. If they only go 1-1 in those first 2 games, is at the end of the road? Oh, hell no. There's still 14 games left in the season and a lot of things that can happen. If they go 0-2 with 2 losses in the division, would that be a bit concerning? Yes, they will have definitely dug themselves a hole. But the Cowboys can help themselves so much by making sure that they win those first 2 games. If they can find a way to win those first 2 games, man, it could be off to the races for this team. Then I look right in the middle of the schedule. You've got weeks 8 and 9. You've got them hosting Seattle and then Philadelphia. They beat Seattle last year up in Seattle. Who's to say they can't beat them this year at AT&T Stadium? And then right after that, your other matchup against the Eagles. Especially if they don't win that Week 2 matchup in Philadelphia, the Cowboys must win that Week 9 matchup against Philly. They must. And as far as the Seattle game goes, if this is a situation where this could be a tiebreaker situation at the end of the season to determine who gets a first round bye or home field advantage, this becomes a must win game as well because the Seattle team could very well be in that mix. And then I look at week 14 on that similar note. You've got a revenge game in a way. The Cowboys go back up to Lambeau to take on Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. A team that historically under Romo and Garrett hasn't played very well in December, played very, very well in December last year, and frankly played pretty well in the playoffs in the divisional round against Green Bay and Lambeau Field. Now here's a chance for revenge, and again, another situation where it could come down to tiebreakers. It could give them a big edge if they could beat Green Bay in Lambeau for a first-round bye, if not home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Overall, I think this Cowboys team is destined for another solid season. As you can hear, usually you don't hear this much effusive praise from me talking about the Cowboys, but I just don't have a lot of real reasons to hate on them. I have concerns about them before I just go ahead and crown their ass. There's not that established history of system to sit there and say that it was worth just letting DeMarco Murray leave. That doesn't mean they made the wrong decision. It just doesn't mean that we can guaranteed say that this is going to work or they did the right thing. Because ultimately we don't know. Again, we don't have that years of track record to say, it doesn't matter which back you put in there, somebody's going to be productive. And at the end of the day, you're counting on Joseph Rando, who likes to steal underpants, Darren McFadden, who likes to break his feet, and Christian Michael, who the Seahawks didn't want anymore. Those are your top three options competing for carries in Dallas. That has to concern Cowboy fans a little bit. And again, I still look at this defense, and while I see the additions of Greg Hardy and Randy Gregory as those that should help the return to health of a Sean Lee, you lose Orlando Scandrick. Yes, you drafted Byron Jones, but it was already not a good secondary to begin with, and you lost your best secondary player. My concern is if that running game isn't to a similar level of last year, how much more pressure is that going to put on the defense, and are they going to get exposed a little bit more? I still think this Cowboys team is one of the elite teams in the NFC, though. I would be stunned if they didn't win this division. I really would. I think anywhere between 10 to 12 wins is a possibility. I probably would settle on the Cowboys going somewhere around 11-5, making the playoffs, and perhaps this year even making some noise in the playoffs. They look really good on paper. There's reason to have some concerns and have some questions about them. But there's also a lot to like about these 2015 Dallas Cowboys.